God is dead. Three simple words that sent shockwaves through the intellectual world and continue to echo in philosophical discussions today. But what did Friedrich Nietzsche mean when he penned this provocative phrase? Was he declaring war on religion, or was he pointing to something far deeper, more unsettling, a seismic shift in the very foundation of Western society? To understand the full weight of this statement, we must journey back into the life of Nietzsche himself, delve into the turbulent world he inhabited, and explore how his radical ideas continue to shape our modern world. Before diving into the depths of God is dead, let's first meet the man who dared to make such a claim. Friedrich Nietzsche was born on October 15, 1844, in the small Prussian town of Rocken, now part of Germany. His father, Karl Ludwig Nietzsche, was a Lutheran pastor, and young Friedrich was deeply embedded in a religious household. However, tragedy struck early. His father died of a brain ailment when Nietzsche was just 5 years old, and his younger brother passed away shortly after. These early experiences with death and loss left a lasting mark on Nietzsche's psyche. Despite these hardships, Nietzsche proved to be an exceptional student. By the age of 24, he became a professor of classical philology at the University of Basel in Switzerland, an impressive feat considering his young age. However, his academic career was short-lived. Nietzsche suffered from chronic health problems, ranging from migraines to severe eyesight issues, that forced him to retire early. It was during his periods of isolation, wandering through the Alps and grappling with his illnesses, that Nietzsche composed his most influential works. These weren't just philosophical musings, they were cries from the soul of a man wrestling with the meaning of existence in a world that seemed increasingly indifferent to traditional beliefs. In 1882, Nietzsche wrote in The Gay Science, "God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him." But what does this mean? Did Nietzsche literally believe that a divine being had perished? Not exactly. When Nietzsche declared that God is dead, he wasn't referring to a physical death of a deity. Instead, he was highlighting the decline of religious and metaphysical belief in Western society. The rise of scientific rationalism, the Enlightenment, and increasing secularization were eroding the foundations of Christian morality that had long structured European culture. But here's the twist: Nietzsche wasn't celebrating this death. He wasn't gleefully cheering the downfall of religion like some might assume. In fact, he saw it as a profound crisis. With the collapse of traditional values, humanity was left adrift in a vast, meaningless universe. The moral compass that guided societies for centuries was gone. What would replace it? To illustrate this philosophical earthquake, Nietzsche crafted one of his most famous parables in The Gay Science, the parable of the madman. In this story, a madman lights a lantern in broad daylight and rushes into a crowded marketplace, crying out, "I seek God, I seek God." The crowd, filled with atheists and skeptics, mocks him. Has he got lost? They laugh. Is he afraid of us? But the madman turns on them, his eyes blazing, and declares, "God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him." The madman's speech continues, growing more desperate as he confronts the crowd with the enormity of what they've done. What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Whither are we moving now? Are we not plunging continually? Backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? The madman realizes something the crowd does not. Killing God isn't just about rejecting religion, it means dismantling the entire moral and metaphysical framework that held society together. Without God, there are no absolute truths, no universal meanings, just an abyss of uncertainty. Interestingly, by the end of the parable, the madman throws his lantern to the ground, shattering it, and declares, "I have come too early. My time is not yet." Nietzsche suggests that even though society has killed God, people have not yet realized the full implications of this act. The true consequences of God's death would unfold gradually over time. To Nietzsche, the death of God symbolized more than just the decline of faith. It represented a broader existential crisis. If life no longer had divine meaning, then how should people live? What values should guide them? Nietzsche feared that in the absence of religious morality, people would fall into nihilism, the belief that life is inherently meaningless. Nihilism, in Nietzsche's eyes, was a dangerous state. Without purpose, individuals might sink into despair or apathy. Worse yet, they might cling to false idols, ideologies or dogmas that promise certainty but ultimately lead to oppression or stagnation. But Nietzsche didn't stop at diagnosing the problem. He sought a solution. Nietzsche believed that the collapse of traditional values opened the door for something new and powerful, the creation of the Übermensch, or Overman, often mistranslated as Superman. The Übermensch is an individual who creates their own values, who lives authentically and courageously in a godless world. The Übermensch doesn't succumb to nihilism. Instead, they embrace the freedom that comes with the absence of divine authority. They become the authors of their own lives, finding meaning through their actions, creativity, and willpower. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche's philosophical novel, he introduces Zarathustra, a prophet-like figure who descends from the mountains to preach about the Übermensch. Zarathustra's teachings are radical and challenging, calling people to rise above herd mentality and mediocrity, to embrace struggle and self-overcoming as pathways to greatness. For Nietzsche, the Übermensch wasn't just an abstract idea, it was a call to arms for humanity to take control of its destiny. He believed that through art, philosophy, and the will to power, individuals could transcend traditional moral constraints and forge their own path. To fully grasp the weight of Nietzsche's ideas, we need to consider the time in which he lived. The 19th century was a period of immense change. The Industrial Revolution was transforming societies. The Enlightenment had ushered in the Age of Reason, and scientific discoveries, like Darwin's theory of evolution, were challenging traditional religious beliefs. The authority of the Church was waning, and with it, the moral frameworks that had governed European life for centuries. Nietzsche saw this cultural shift as both a danger and an opportunity. Without God, humanity was at a crossroads: fall into despair or rise to create new values. But Nietzsche was also reacting to the complacency he saw in his contemporaries. Many people were abandoning religious beliefs, but they hadn't yet confronted the full implications of this shift. They were, in Nietzsche's words, living as if God were still alive, clinging to old moral codes without the faith that originally justified them. In this sense, Nietzsche's God is dead was both a diagnosis and a warning. The old structures were crumbling, but what would replace them was far from certain. While the gay science introduced the famous phrase, Nietzsche continued to expand on these ideas in his later works. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he delved deeper into the concept of the Übermensch and the eternal recurrence, the idea that life repeats itself infinitely, and we must learn to embrace it fully. In Beyond Good and Evil, and on the genealogy of morality, Nietzsche critiqued traditional moral systems, arguing that they were rooted in resentment, a deep-seated resentment of the strong by the weak. He believed that Christian morality, in particular, was a form of slave morality, promoting humility and meekness at the expense of strength and vitality. Nietzsche's call was for a revaluation of all values, a complete overhaul of the moral and philosophical systems that had dominated Western thought for centuries. He urged individuals to question everything, to dismantle inherited beliefs, and to build new frameworks rooted in personal authenticity and creativity. Nietzsche's philosophy is often misunderstood. Some have misread his proclamation of God as dead as an endorsement of nihilism or a call for moral chaos. Worse still, Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch was later co-opted by totalitarian ideologies, most infamously the Nazis, who twisted his ideas to justify their own horrific agenda. But Nietzsche himself was vehemently opposed to nationalism, anti-Semitism, and authoritarianism. His writings were manipulated by his sister, Elizabeth Forster Nietzsche, after his mental collapse in 1889. She edited his works to align with her nationalist views, contributing to these misinterpretations. In reality, Nietzsche's philosophy was a call for individual empowerment, not oppression. It was about confronting the void left by the death of God and forging new paths toward meaning and fulfillment. Nietzsche's life took a dark turn in his later years. In 1889, at the age of 44, he suffered a complete mental breakdown. The cause remains debated. Some suggest syphilis, others a hereditary condition, or the toll of his lifelong illnesses. After his collapse, he never regained his faculties and spent the last years of his life under the care of his mother and later his sister. He died in 1900 at the age of 55. Though his life ended in tragedy, Nietzsche's ideas lived on, growing in influence throughout the 20th century and beyond. His works inspired existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, psychologists like Carl Jung, and countless artists, writers, and thinkers. Nietzsche's declaration that God is dead paved the way for existentialism, a philosophical movement that grappled with the challenges of living in a world without inherent meaning. Thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus picked up where Nietzsche left off, exploring themes of freedom, absurdity, and the human struggle for meaning. In literature, Nietzsche's influence can be seen in the works of Franz Kafka, James Joyce, and Hermann Hesse, all of whom wrestled with questions of identity, morality, and the search for purpose in a rapidly changing world. Psychology, too, owes a debt to Nietzsche. Sigmund Freud's exploration of the unconscious mind and Carl Jung's theories of individuation and archetypes were deeply influenced by Nietzsche's ideas about the human psyche and the struggle for self-actualization. Even in popular culture, Nietzsche's shadow looms large. From movies like Fight Club and The Matrix to the lyrics of rock bands and the themes of video games, Nietzsche's call to confront the void and create meaning resonates with audiences seeking purpose in a complex, often confusing world. So, what does God is dead mean for us today? In many ways, Nietzsche's diagnosis of the modern condition feels as relevant now as it did in the 19th century. The decline of traditional religious authority, the rise of scientific rationalism, and the search for meaning in an increasingly complex world continue to challenge us. But Nietzsche didn't leave us hopeless. His philosophy invites us to confront these challenges head-on, to reject passive acceptance and instead become active creators of our own values and purposes. Perhaps the most important takeaway from Nietzsche's God is dead is this: when the old gods fall, we are faced with a terrifying but liberating truth. The responsibility for meaning, morality, and purpose lies not in the heavens but within ourselves. In the words of Nietzsche himself, he who has a why to live can bear almost any how.